The marriage was doomed from the start. Tony's twin obsessions of sex and work left little room for his wife's needs.
Loads of his friends have told me and described to me his great sexual appetite. In fact, one of his friends remarked to me, "If it moves, he'll have it."
Homosexuality was illegal in the 1950s, but Tony anticipated the 60s in his defiance of conventional sexual attitudes and willingness to camp it up, as in this photograph of him taken on holiday in Italy.
Certainly saw him with a lot of bisexual and homosexual people.
Several of his assistants, his photographic assistants, the girls in his studio in earlier days, thought that he himself was like that.
Rejecting the society world of his mother, Tony embraced the wild side of life. He took pictures of seedy parts of London, like this joint in Canning Town, which he explored with an old friend from Eton, Andy Garnett. Highly sexed, Tony was also a magnet for women, and in his line of work had plenty of opportunities for casual encounters. In the 1950s, his love life was the kind of sexual free-for-all which for most people didn't kick in until the late 60s.
There was a constant succession of girlfriends, and loads of his friends have told me and described to me his great sexual appetite. In fact, one of his friends remarked to me, "If it moves, he'll have it."
Tony didn't just go after society beauties. In the mid-50s, he caused a stir in upper-class circles when he started dating a Chinese girl from Trinidad, actress and rising star Jacqueline Chan.
She was exotic, you see, because we hadn't seen many Chinese. We hardly knew what China was. I think he was ahead of his time. There weren't many Chinese girls around to have affairs with. But that's quite sort of typical of his unconventionality, I think, was having a Chinese girlfriend.
Jackie was the first real love of Tony's life, but she was just one of many girlfriends. What no one has known until now is how Tony, restless and elusive, was running several women at the same time. At the end of 1957, he photographed a stunning 18-year-old debutante, Gina Ward.
They clicked instantly, and they did have this really passionate affair, and she fell deeply in love with him.
This was the man, reckless, promiscuous, creative, secretive and unconventional, who in February 1958 went to a dinner party and met Princess Margaret, one of the most eligible women in the world. Tony started secretly dating Princess Margaret and introduced her to a new world, offbeat and edgy. He took her to his studio in a scruffy part of Pimlico. He entertained her in a room he kept in a converted pub in Rotherhithe, in the London docks.
I think that she thought she was having a taste of real bohemian life, and I think that gave her pleasure.
But Princess Margaret had no idea just how wild her new boyfriend was, and she didn't know that as a result of his troubled relationship with his mother, he had never been a one-woman man.
It may seem strange that while he was falling deeply in love with Princess Margaret, he was still carrying on with Jackie Chan and Gina Ward. But I don't think that sexual fidelity has ever been a keynote of Tony's character.
Years later.
During these weekends, they went in for a kind of experimentation that became fairly standard among certain sets in the 60s. Quite a lot went on there. It was Tony and the Fries. They were very much at the cutting edge, very avant-garde, and so a lot went on. They took quite a lot of alcohol. The result was that, really, inhibitions were fairly readily shed. They were all extremely close. Tony was still extremely fond of Camilla, and when inhibitions are shed, latent attraction always comes to the fore. Camilla and Tony were still deeply fond of each other, and at some point, it appears, they became lovers again.
Tony wasn't just having a fling with Camilla. There was also Gina and Princess Margaret. Never predictable, this was the moment he chose to make a commitment and propose to the Queen's sister.
Tony's mother, of course, Lady Ross, was thrilled with the engagement. It was the fulfilment of her wildest social dreams, and of course she was all over Tony then. He was showered with her approval.
Before the official announcement, the bridegroom had to tie up a few loose ends from his previous lives. He told Jackie Chan and his girlfriend, Gina Ward, that he was engaged. Then he arranged to see Tom Parr, one of his gay friends, to check whether any photographs he'd taken of them on holiday could be misinterpreted.
It was only when the engagement was announced that Tom Parr realised that he was looking through them just in case there was anything sort of possibly compromising in them that he had to know about.
No one had more of a ringside seat on the activities of his masters than Princess Margaret's chauffeur, John Larkin. One day she told him to drive her to Tony's bolt hole for an unscheduled visit.
He said, "Very well, Your Royal Highness," and he thought, "Oh dear, here's trouble," because he slightly knew that things were not quite what they seemed. And he thought, how do I warn Lord Snowdon? What do I do? And coming up the drive, he did the only thing he could think of. He flashed his headlights on and off very, very quickly. And duly, Tony appeared at the door, embraced Princess Margaret warmly, said, "Darling, how lovely to see you." Then he looked straight at John Larkin and said, "Larkin, the Aston needs filling up." And John Larkin, who knew perfectly well there was petrol in the tank of the Aston Martin, said, "Very good, my lord," and drove it off to the nearest village. When he got there, he stopped, opened the boot, and out hopped Jackie.
Tony, now 39, was having a passionate affair with a woman 16 years his junior. But ironically, his standing in the royal family couldn't have been better. Tony pulled off a brilliant modern take on royal pageantry. But behind the scenes, his private life was falling apart. His relationship with Jackie was widely known, and in January 1971, the papers threatened to break the story. All concerned denied it. Then Jackie confessed the truth to her horrified parents.
The Reddings were incandescent. They obviously forbade Jackie to have anything more to do with him, and they completely brought down the shutters on their friendship with Tony. This whole episode was very upsetting indeed. He felt life again was closing in on him, and he began to feel a sort of sense of despair, you know.
Tony took out his frustrations on his wife.
A close friend of the princess's told me that Princess Margaret was convinced that on the morning she had some frightfully important engagement in the evening. That is when Tony would engineer a row so that her eyes were red and swollen for the evening.
Crucially, Tony had remained on good terms with the royal family, who were grateful to him for never having spilled the beans.
There are so many things he could have written about, could have said, so many remarks, so many disclosures about the royal family, and he absolutely never has. He did keep his mouth absolutely shut.
Tony's marriage to Lucy seemed much less volatile, but away from the public gaze, Tony hadn't changed. History was repeating itself. He was up to his old tricks.
One of his assistants once said to me, Tony was absolutely brilliant at keeping a lot of balls in the air at once, like a juggler, but just occasionally something would go wrong. And just like with a juggler, if he misses one, the whole lot crash to the floor and there's a good deal of fallout. Well, this has happened once or twice in Tony's life.
On New Year's Eve 1996, a journalist called Anne Hills committed suicide. She'd worked with Tony on his campaigns for the disabled, but the papers revealed that Tony had been having an affair with her throughout his marriage to Lucy.